Good evening, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with all of you today at this Neuropsychiatry Roundtable, which is being co-hosted by Apollo Hospital with Buddhi Clinic and the International Neuropsychiatric Association. Neuropsychiatry as a specialty actually lives in the body. All the acronym IPS, I was a bit surprised because to all of us we know what IPS means, right? The Indian Police Service. I think it is also appropriate that this society is called Indian Psychiatry Society because IPS makes the streets safe for us to walk and they make our mental landscape free for us to move about. So I think it is not just coincidence that both of them have the same acronym, not just coincidence. It's also gratifying that today we have Professor Gagandeep Singh, who is joining us through a video recorded message, who is the President of the Indian Association of Neurology. So this is where neuropsychiatry stands, and it brings to all of us who are dealing with acute or chronic neuro disorders, neurological illnesses or neurosurgical procedures that we have undergone, it brings a very powerful perspective of integration and multidisciplinary care. Now, in the last few decades, maybe the last 20 years or so, there has been a lot of advances in the field of medicine. Every day, you don't have to be a doctor. Every day, if you open your WhatsApp, or you open your TV channel, or you look at the newspaper, every day you're bombarded either with a new disease or a new treatment modality. So there is this constant development and constant surge of information that is being thrown out to us. But for those of us who are dealing with patients every day, either as clinicians or as administrators, one of the things we find that in this explosion of new diagnostic modalities, new treatment modalities, new approaches to disease, somewhere the way of looking at the patient in a holistic way is probably getting diminished. So where we are looking for tech and we are looking for the latest gadgets, maybe what is required is to step back and look at this patient through different eyes, through a different lens, to try to understand what the patient is facing while dealing with the illness. And so we need to have a whole different perspective, which I think neuropsychiatry brings with it. So it's a way of integrating a variety of diagnostic approaches, analytic approaches, and then building a complementary system which can ensure that whatever our modern healthcare is able to deliver through its technology and its expertise and its new gadgets, whatever we are able to deliver using this ecosystem is enhanced and improved by this complementarity of approaches and complementarity of methods. So at Apollo Hospital, for example, we were the pioneers of the Apollo Health Check. And I think our chairman started doing health checks in this country when the word health check itself was unknown. I'm talking way before he started Apollo Hospital, he actually started health checks. Until today, we have done over 1.5 million health checks. And I think as Apollo Hospital, we do a pretty good job doing health checks across the country in all formats, in clinics, in hospitals. And we have managed to diagnose several diseases in a very early stage and then offer to this patient complete cure. But when we met Dr. Krishnamoorthy, and our collaboration is actually very short, our official collaboration is just a few months. When we met Dr. Krishnamoorthy and he offered to us this ability of looking at the patient to understand whether he has any cognitive difficulties, this is something that we had never thought about. What about his mental well-being? This is again something that we had never thought about. And so this was the birth of a very powerful collaboration between Buddhi Clinic and Apollo Hospitals using something as simple as a health check. So when there is collaboration that is meaningful and when there is a coming together of partners who complement each other, we found that there are new ways to enhance what we have already been delivering to the patient. So borrowing the best of what they have and putting it together with what Apollo does really well, we have come up with this new premium health check. When any new product is put on the market, there is always a latent period for people to get aware of it and for the adoption to rise. So I think in the next few months, we will see that all these concepts will get integrated into our health check programs. And we will now have a very powerful health check program that looks at a patient who walks into our health check facility in a much more holistic way. So this is just one example that I can offer of how working with his team, Dr. ESK's team, will actually enhance the value that we deliver. And it is not just about this. We know that today chronic illnesses and non-communicable diseases have taken root in our society and are fast displacing the infectious diseases. 15 years back or 20 years back, our visit to the doctor was typically a short-lived encounter. You fell sick, maybe you had fever, you felt unwell, you went to the doctor, he gave you some medicine, 3 days later you were fine. And that was how we remember our interactions with doctors. These were episodes, in most instances, far apart. Today when we deal with this epidemic of chronic illness, diabetes, coronary artery disease, chronic kidney disease, now the relationship with your doctor is not an episodic one separated by months or years in between. This relationship is now a partnership. And the stronger the partnership, the better will be the outcome for the patient. So what do we mean when we say partnership? Whatever the doctor can offer you, and I was speaking to one of Dr. ESK's oldest patients, so I will take the liberty of quoting exactly what he said. He said 40% the doctor does for you. If he is a good diagnostician, he makes a good diagnosis, he puts you on the correct medicine, 40% he does. 40% the patient has to do. Making sure you follow the advice, making sure you participate in the treatment, making sure you escalate whatever needs to be told to the doctor appropriately. So 40% comes from the doctor, 40% comes from the patient, and 20% you have to leave to the Almighty. I think that's a fair summary of the kind of partnerships we are building today. So we need to walk together, doctor and patient, within the system to ensure that the patient gets the best possible outcomes. Because these are not diseases which can be cured. These are diseases which need to be managed. And in order to manage them effectively, we need new collaboration, we need more powerful collaboration, we need a transdisciplinary approach. This is a word I actually learned from Dr. ESK because he uses it very often. So a transdisciplinary approach is the need of the hour. Just one last point I'd like to make, and this approach has to start as early as possible. So if there is a problem, the earlier it is diagnosed, the better is going to be the outcome. So with these few words, I'd like to again compliment Dr. ESK and his team for putting together this Neuropsychiatry Roundtable. It's an absolute privilege for Apollo Hospital to associate with you, and I hope we are laying a foundation of a partnership that will get stronger as we go ahead. I'd like to thank all of you who've come here today to participate in the function, and above all the speakers for today's function. Dr. Balsama has travelled all the way from Sydney to be here with us, and so have our other speakers. So I think we will definitely benefit from their wisdom and their insight, and we will take something back from this function. Thank you.
Sir, podium, sir. Sir, wait. Sir, podium full mercy, sir. Podium கொஞ்சம் அப்படியே தள்ளுங்க, திருப்பி போட்டுக்கலாம். Side by side, sir. Photographer.
Picking up this field from a nascent big. Really, I think Dr. Gagandeep Singh had a better way of talking because after Dr. Sridhar's speech, it's very difficult to come on to dais and speak. Such a powerful, such a nice communication of ideas. And it's my pleasure and privilege to be here. I thank Dr. Krishnamoorthy for making me part of this. And we all know that there is nothing different from neurology and psychiatry. By and large, whatever we do, it's all the brain that decides what we want to do. And unfortunately, the misconceptions, I think misunderstandings the public have, of course, we also have contributed much to the misconceptions, making simple things more complicated, because most of the times we do understand that we say that control your thoughts, control your emotions, but we never tell that control your diabetes, control your hypertension on your own. Indirectly we tell the person that it is your fault not to control your thoughts, it's your fault not to control your behavior, it's your fault not to control your emotions. I think this is a study of neuropsychiatry will give us a lot of insights into understanding why the people behave the way in which they behave. And I know it's a long way to go. As Dr. Sridhar said, that I think we need to work quite a bit in making it a holistic medicine, especially the mental health. The importance of mental health is not being given as much as it deserves to get. Because we all know that whatever decision we take, whatever we do, it all depends on the mental health which we have. Why some people, in spite of the brilliance, don't succeed as much as somebody who is not so brilliant, for the simple reason that the capacity to judge is far greater than the people whose capacity to remember the lessons or recapitulate what they have read. So this is where I think the theories of neuropsychiatry or the mechanisms involved in various emotions, thoughts, behavior, judgments, intelligence, everything what we do every day in and day out. So earlier we realized that better it would be for the world. After all, as we see in every day-to-day day-to-day news, something is happening bad somewhere, crimes are happening somewhere, some anti-social elements are doing something. So these are all things which we need to work out. I know it's a too big an area for a psychiatrist to do that. I think there are the social scientists to do it, the psychologists to do it. But for the psychiatrists, we need to give the basic scientific information that how the brain works. Like, let us say the addictions. We all know that it is not simple that I get addicted. Why I get addicted and why my friend is not getting addicted. There is something to do with my brain. My reward systems are different. Why I like masala dosha and somebody like jalebi is entirely what your brain decides. After all, the reward system asks you to do it again and again. So the pleasure involved in doing some activity, the pleasure principles or the pleasure areas or the chemicals that are involved in generating the pleasure within the body, it all decides why I should do it again. Not everybody does that. Somebody is not interested in food, somebody is interested in clothes, somebody is interested in something else. That means the stimulus that gives the pleasure to the individual is different. So the area of pleasure might be the same in every brain, but what stimulates that area is different for me, different for you, different somebody else. Somebody enjoys reading, somebody enjoys music, I agree that over a period of time you tend to take the pleasure. Repeatedly you do it, most probably the pleasure gets reinforced, repeated. So these are all things which we need to study, and I think there is a lot of a journey to travel for neuropsychiatry. At present it looks a bit clumsy. Like the divisions which we have in psychiatry, like schizophrenia, mania, depression, they may not be the categories which really they are. Perhaps a day should come where we have something like, I'm sure Dr. Durga will be talking about, the autoimmunity, inflammations. So perhaps depending on some autoimmune mechanisms or inflammation of some area of the brain, they could influence the executive functions, they could influence the visceral functions, they could influence the emotional functions, they could influence the cognitive functions. So depending on which functions are affected by what type of mechanism, perhaps the expression of that would be depicted as an illness. Currently, we are in a state where we do make categories like a few disorders, but unfortunately nature doesn't follow those categories. That's why you have some mood symptoms in schizophrenia, some schizophrenia symptoms in obsessive compulsive disorder, some obsessive compulsive symptoms in somewhere else. But for lack of better classification system, for lack of better, nosological terms, we use this to communicate. There is nothing wrong in that, but we need to work on this further. I once again congratulate Dr. Krishnamoorthy for making such a beautiful arrangements and also taking psychiatry at a higher level than what it really is today. And I hope Indian Psychiatric Society would take a leap out of his book, would try to do whatever best we can do from that angle. And once again, I thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity and wish this conference a grand success. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Also joining us today are two eminent international speakers, Professor Valsama Ekan, Professor of Neuropsychiatry, Sydney, Australia, and President-elect, International Neuropsychiatric Association, and Professor Ludger Tivanus, Professor of Neuropsychiatry, University of Freiburg, Germany, and Executive Member, International Neuropsychiatric Association. I would like to call upon Professor Valsama Ekan to deliver her lecture on autism and childhood-related neurodevelopmental disorders.
I was very inspired to kind of get onto the bandwagon of mind is everything, that's a seat of your executive functioning, so I should be able to make a great job there. So I went and studied psychiatry, and there was a lot of neurology at NIMHANS, and the two came together. And the psychiatry I knew was brainless, and the neurology I knew was mindless. So I thought, well, that's not going to help very much, is it? And then came the neurodevelopmental disorder idea, where there's a lot that you can do if you can catch those differences in development from a really early life. And I'll tell you how we might do that. Neurodevelopmental disorders, by and large, means that your brain is not developing in a typical way, and therefore you've got difficulties either with your cognition, which is your intelligence, your communication, the way you talk, your behavior, how you act, and your motor function, how you walk, run, etc. And examples of neurodevelopmental disorders, most of you know, autism is very commonly, very well known these days, speech disorders, learning disorders, etc. And it's quite common. Globally, neurodevelopmental disorders affect 52.9 million, and it accounts for 29.3 million years lived with disability. And a recent Indian study showed that 1 in 8 children aged 2 to 9 years, that's a lot of children if you think about it, 1 in 8 children are having neurodevelopmental disorders. But if you start when the child is starting school to recognize there is a difference in the development, you've already missed the boat, because your brain is highly plastic. 90% of your brain development happens before the age of 5. So if you are identifying a child with a developmental problem, when they start school, say, oh, why is he or she not talking? Or why is he or she not making friends? It's too late. So that's why we need to be really focusing a lot on the first 2,000 days. That's from pregnancy to the start of school. That's because when our brain is developing, what it's doing is making a lot of connections. And you can see in pregnancy that 36 weeks, it's ready to make those connections. By the time you're born at birth, it's reaching out to make the connections. By 6 months, it's almost like a bush. And by 2 years, it's almost like a forest. Because those connections have really formed. And all what you do after 3-4 years of age is select the ones you are using, consolidate it, and prune away the ones you are not using. For a child with a developmental problem, if you are only identifying them at the age of 4 or 5 or 6, what are you building on? Your building blocks are not there for you to build on. But if you started really early at 12, 18 months of age, you've got the maximum chance of making that connections as much as possible to connect well. And this is an example of brain development in terms of time. So the bottom line, if you look there, most of your vision, your hearing, your habitual ways of responding, your peer social, complex social brain network phenomenon, which we take for granted. But if you are struggling to make the emotional connection of who this person is, what that person means to me, then you have lost that connection. You have lost that social opportunity. So language or communication becomes a way in which we interact socially. And in kids with autism, it could be totally not there, or maybe some differences, or maybe that they've got well-developed speech, but the way they use it is different. And it's said that in Silicon Valley, there's a lot of geek syndrome, which is they are very mechanically minded. They want to be solving those problems, whereas we would be saying, oh, when is my break, when am I going to see my mate? But they can really get absorbed. You can make great nuclear physicists, as Albert Einstein, Isaac Newton have been said to have had these traits. So to a certain extent, that can be highly functional, but that's at the exclusion of the social relational aspects of your life. So biology of the brain in autism is such that you're not interested in the external world. So if a chair came to me and said, let's play, I would say, go away, leave me alone. It's how they feel. They don't realize that others have got feelings, others have got let alone what those feelings are. So when you call the child or try to say, hey, look, you make a lot of these interactional, connectional stuff in those schooling and sensory social routines. But kids with autism are not interested. And they will scream and shout and say, leave me alone. So with time, what happens is that parents and others leave them alone to do their own things or their little interests and be there. You should be doing the exact opposite. As early as possible, you should be catching them, identifying them, and giving them a lot of stimulation so that they can develop. And this is a great study from a very old study from Chicago. 3-year-old children were taken. 2 years they were given preschool program from low socioeconomic status, and after that did nothing. The children who got the intervention had much better educational status, higher achievement, on-time graduation, etc. So the return on investment, this is from the Heckman equation. He got the Nobel Prize in economics. $1 to $13 if you invest really early. But as you grow later, that's where the politicians and the government will put money, because they get their return on the ballot box. You need to wait a very long time to see the investment in the earlier years. But that's where, as a country, we should be going. But if we fail today's children, we are going to fail tomorrow's society. Thank you very much.
And you do have psychiatric presentations in many, many different neurological, vascular disorders, whatever. But today I want to talk about, I want to present to you two cases with autoimmune disorders who turned out to have autoimmune disorders. And the sometimes rather long way to get to that insight. And the whole story began with this paper, the story of the autoimmune encephalitis. So the insight that psychiatric presentations may be caused by immunological diseases really started in 2008 with the discovery of the anti-NMDA receptor encephalitis. And this is the first lady we discovered or found in 2009, my first patient with the NMDA receptor encephalitis. She was a 31-year-old patient who, until that age, so for 3 decades of her life, was perfectly fit and well, no history of psychiatric disorders whatsoever in the family. But then suddenly, out of the blue, she was working in a big company as the secretary to the big boss, and so she had a very high functional level. And then suddenly, within weeks, she developed hallucinations, delusions, paranoid ideas, and all began with a set of 3 seizures. So that was why, at the very beginning, everybody thought that must be something neurological. And so she was sent to a university department for neurology, where she was diagnosed based on the high level of the university hospital, and they didn't find anything. So they referred her back, and they said, this is not neurological. And to give you an idea of what it looked like, I have brought you these 2 videos. And after that, she was treated for 2 years in different psychiatric hospitals in South Germany under the diagnosis of catatonic schizophrenia. And here below you see another. This is of course in German, but I have translated it to you like the other videos.
Linken Arm jetzt bitte heben, hochheben, gut, ganz hochheben. Genau. Und jetzt locker fallen lassen einfach.
So what you see here are catatonic features. The doctor tells her to lift the arm, and then he tells her to let go, but the arm gets stuck in the air. It's a phenomenon called catalepsia, and it's one of the earliest symptoms of catatonia, or catatonic schizophrenia. That's the way it was named at that time. And here you see how she moves the hand to the mouth, but then the hand gets stuck, and she kind of forgets to take it away, and she freezes. So one of the very, very classical catatonic features. Now, in these 2 years in different psychiatric hospitals, remember she had been investigated in the university neurological department, and they said there's nothing wrong with her neurologically. She was then treated for 2 years in psychiatric hospitals with many, many different drugs, and just want to give you an impression of how many drugs they were. Then eventually she was referred to our specialized department, and at that time, in that neurological hospital, they already knew about these autoimmune neurological disorders, about the NMDA receptor encephalitis. That's what she was suffering from. But at that time, it was not known that the tests could be false negative. And when she came to us, I had heard that, and then I sent her CSF to Angela Vincent to Oxford, and she discovered that she was suffering from NMDA receptor encephalitis. And after that, we did all these investigations, including this PET imaging. And even though I don't expect you to be able to read PET images, even as a lay person, you can see, for example, if you look at this picture, that there is a strong difference between the right and left hemisphere in metabolizing glucose. And with the autoantibody finding and the PET image finding, it was clear that this lady was not suffering from catatonic schizophrenia, but from a neurological brain disease called anti-NMDA receptor encephalitis, a disease where autoantibodies in the body dock to brain structures and then in turn lead to dysfunction of the infected brain areas. You can see the dysfunction here, and you saw the clinical picture in the first movie. And then after immunotherapy, so after having learned that this is not catatonic schizophrenia, but rather NMDA receptor encephalitis, we treated this patient not with neuroleptics, but with with immune therapy. And this is just, again in German of course, but just to give you an impression of what she looked like later. So I think I can stop there. It's just to give you an impression that all these motoric symptoms were gone, and she was more or less healed. I mean, she did have some sensitivities to go into crowded places, whereas before suffering from this autoimmune encephalitis, she was loving to go to a village, a marketplace. Afterwards, she still didn't like it because it was too much, too loud, too many social signals for her. But apart from that, she was absolutely fit and well. Now, this is what I call a classical neuropsychiatric presentation, even though she had been diagnosed as suffering from schizophrenia. The whole story started with seizures, and that doesn't really belong to a classical primary psychiatric presentation. But there are also other cases, and that's the second case I want to present to you today, this evening. This is a lady in whom we too thought that it's rather primary psychiatric. A 42-year-old teacher and sport therapist. She had suffered from bouts of depression age 22, 28, 32. Then age 35, she developed hallucinations, delusions, sexual delusions, and also delusional smells. And age 41, and 42, she had acute exacerbations of these schizophreniform symptoms. All her thinking was sexualized, so she always had to think about different sexual meanings. And this is an example of what she looked like in this state.
Und er hat am Tag schon am Morgen schon den Eindruck, meine Mutter hat das irgendwie gemerkt. Also ich kam die Treppe runter, meine Mutter hat so, na, Hellei? So ist sie nie zu mir, was sagt die nie zu mir? Und ich war so, oh. Ja, okay, es muss damit zusammenhängen. Das ist ja immer meine Fantasie war, dass alle das merken und so. Da dachte ich, ja, gar nicht viel. Also, wie lange das war jetzt?
Well, I can cut it short at that time. So she was slightly fast in her thinking. And the whole content of her thinking, I could have gone through that video for another 3 minutes, and you would have realized that the whole content of her thinking was sexualized, and she couldn't stop her from thinking that everything she was seeing, every mimic, every facial expression was somehow related to some strange sexual thoughts. Now, the investigation in this lady were rather normal. She had in the MRI findings a slight temporal lateral atrophy. The EEG was slightly abnormal but very diffuse. There was a diffuse rhythmic slowing, which maybe you can see from afar. And the CSF was basically normal apart from a blood-brain barrier dysfunction. But then again, that is seen in about 20% of people. And then we had her as an inpatient 3 times. She also had Hashimoto antibodies, and with having this signal in the laboratory finding, you know that there are very few cases who may respond to cortisone. But since everything in this case was so classical for schizophrenia, I thought, well, if I start treating this patient with cortisone, I can almost treat 20% of my patients with cortisone. But having tried out the last possible neuroleptic drug, clozapine, to which he responded but always got side effects, then after the 3rd admission we tried cortisone and then see what happened. geht.
Ja, also ich bin sehr erleichtert und sehr froh, dass jetzt die Stimmen weggegangen sind seit ein paar Tagen, die ja sehr hartnäckig irgendwie bei mir geblieben sind, trotz der Erhöhung des Solian. Ja.
Ganz kurz, wie lange ist die Cortisonbehandlung zurück?
Die Cortisonbehandlung ist beendet worden vor 2 Wochen, also die Infusion. Ja, und ich habe jetzt wieder das Gefühl, dass das Gehirn so durchgepustet worden ist, dass es wie so eine Strukturveränderung des Gehirns ist dass ich dadurch auch diese ganzen Schemata im Gehirn wieder verloren habe. Diese Wahlschemata bezüglich der Sexualität, die sind jetzt im Moment wieder überhaupt gar nicht interessant, sondern die sind irgendwie komplett distanziert von mir. Also die interessieren mich überhaupt nicht mehr.
Wenn ich mich jetzt so kratze oder sowas mache?
Ja, das ist voll uninteressant geworden.
Wie erklärt man sich das?
Ja, es ist, als hätten die keine Platzbänder im Kopf, als wäre es irgendwie alles zu viel und als wären die auch vollkommen ohne Bedeutung.
Und haben Sie jetzt noch diese Gerüchte auch noch alles wahrgenommen in letzter Zeit?
Nee.
Wird Gerüchte gesprochen?
Nee.
So you can imagine that we were quite impressed by this rather unexpected experience after 3 years of trying all the neuroleptic drugs, the classical drugs for schizophrenia. We tried cortisone and within 2 weeks all the symptoms were gone, the hallucinations were gone, the delusions were gone. Half a year later she redeveloped the same symptoms, so we did another course of cortisone IV over 1 week and again it vanished away. And then we put her on another immunosuppressant as a cytophyprin, I believe it's called in English. And since then, she is symptom-free with respect to these symptoms. Now, this is a classical primary psychiatric case presentation of an autoimmune disease of which we don't know the precise pathomechanism, but still it's very important because the therapy is rather convincing. And the way forward, that's my final slide, or second last slide, in this area is case-based. I think that's very interesting. Experts, you cannot kind of organize cohort studies, which is the traditional approach in research, that you compare big groups of patients with and without specific symptoms or with and without specific therapies. But in this area, as well in neurology as also in psychiatry, the whole progress is rather case-based, which I personally like very much. So, coming to my conclusion, secondary organic neuropsychiatric disorders are a small but a relevant subgroup of mental disorders. They generally present with a typical organic flavor or phenotype, but they may present, as in the second case, like classical psychiatric disorders, in this case like schizophrenia. It may look mental, but it could be the brain, to put it into a phrase, and investigations such as MRI, EEG, CSF, laboratory findings, and PET may be very helpful, but not always tell you the precise diagnosis neither, like in the first case. And there is a lot to learn and great potential in this area of medicine for our patients. Thank you very much for that.
As Dr. Balsa and Dr. Ennapadam who have taken the trouble to be here. We have others like Professor Matthew Verghese from Romance in the audience, and I'm sure some others have joined. I have a request, especially for those of you who are videotaping the last lecture. Just want to point out that the patient videos are confidential, they're meant for teaching, they are not meant to be disseminated. It's a special request from Professor Lurka, so please do not share those patient videos. It's extremely important, it's for teaching. So you listened to a talk about childhood, brain development and how it influences childhood behavior. You listened to a talk about adults and how they present with psychiatric manifestations, but the problem is actually an autoimmune condition. And here I am to tell you a little bit about the aging brain. And what I'd like to emphasize is that neuropsychiatry covers the entire human lifespan. And what we are talking about is neurological causes for mental health conditions as well as neurological complications and disability that are associated with mental health conditions. But we are also talking about psychiatric consequences of neurological conditions. So it's quite an important clinical spectrum, and it's one that we deal with not just in the clinic, not just in hospital, but also in community and public health, and hence therefore it's important. Now, what happens as you age? Most of the affected areas are what we call the polymodal and association cortices. You don't seem to have it projecting. You wake up in the morning to a smell. It's not a very pleasant smell, but it makes you happy because you know you're close to home, right? And that's the same part of the brain that the rat shares with you, which is why the rat has a very good smell memory, right? So this is the oldest part of the human brain. It's not just a series of pathways, it's an extremely chemical-rich part of the human brain. And this gets affected as we get older, and that's something for all of us to keep in mind. Now, what happens also is that you have problems with blood flow and glucose metabolism. And I'll show you a picture in a short while, and that affects your brain. You also have a problem in the neurochemistry. There is a decline in the dopamine transporter system. Right? So this is the reason why, as you age, you not only have problems with memory and cognition, as we call higher brain function, you also have physical problems with movement, motor functioning. And of course, at an extreme, that's what causes things like Parkinson's disease. But both these things are part of the aging process. Now the hippocampus is a part of your brain that's critical to your memory. So if you draw a line between your ears, right in the middle is your hippocampus. It's just the size of a finger joint, but yet it stores your entire life's memory. And how does it store it? It stores it like you would store files in an office, in sequential order. Which is why when you are affected by a degenerative disease of your brain, you lose your newest memories first and you retain your oldest memories. So people, for example, forget the grandchildren in the family, then the sons-in-law and daughters-in-law, because they came later into the family, then the children, then the spouse, then the siblings, then the parents. And one reason why dementia is called a fate worse than death is that finally you forget who you are. You lose your own identity as a human being, and nothing could be worse than that for anyone. So that's the kind of progression that happens when it gets to memory loss. This is again a PET scan image, and what I want to show you is that if you see in the images below with the arrows, you can see how there is hypometabolism. And this is what you see in a person whose brain is aging, in a person who's developing dementia. And that's something that we need to understand. And that's of course what we were talking about, the cerebral metabolism. What happens also as you get older? Picture this. A young person's going to the airport to board a flight. They get delayed, they land up late in the airport, and someone says, "Oh, gate is closed, sir. You can't get in. Oh, gate is closed, madam. You can't get in." A young person immediately starts thinking, "Can I get another flight? Can I go and catch a train? Can I go get a bus? How do I get there?" Older people stand there and get terribly upset and annoyed, right? And one of the reasons for this is as you get older, you have a difficulty or an inability to shift set. You're not able to move from one train track that you're on mentally to another train track. It becomes it's harder and harder for people. The other thing that happens as you age is that it's your short-term memory that is primarily affected. your long-term memory, your memory of how to do things, for example, how to ride a bicycle or how to drive a car, those things are retained, but your short-term memory goes. So we often meet people, if you ask them what did you have for breakfast this morning, they will struggle to tell you what they had for breakfast this morning. But if you ask them about something from the past, they will give you all details. Oh, I went to see this MGR movie, it was with my wife, and we had just been married. I can tell you the whole story because that comes from the past. So that's another feature of getting older. There is something called the concept of working memory. And the working memory is really what we call the executive brain. It helps you plan, it helps you organize, it helps you complete the round of tasks that you want to do. It helps you do it in a sequence that is appropriate. You will have a meal waiting for you when we finish this meeting. Right? It's your working memory that tells you start with the starters, then go to the main course, and finally go to the dessert. If your working memory is not working very well, you will kind of mishmash it and not really follow any particular plan. So that's what your working memory is all about, and that gets affected as you get older. Okay. So there is a loss of efficiency in acquiring cognitive or higher mental function information. There is a problem with processing speed. You'll notice that as we get older, we take time to absorb things, we take more time to respond to a question or respond to something. We slow down, and that's part and parcel of cognitive aging. All your old information, as I said, is spared. There's one point I want to make, because especially in middle age, I get people coming to me, oh, I'm really worried about my memory. And the point I want to make is the most common reason why you have subjective forgetfulness, I'm losing my memory, is being stressed out or depressed. It's not losing your memory. Okay? This changes as you get older, but this is very true in the middle years. So one of the things to always ask yourself when somebody says I'm losing my memory is to find out whether they actually are experiencing symptoms of stress, anxiety or depression or something else that's going on. Now, one of the other factors that we have to understand is that there is a transitional period. And this transitional period from normal aging, what used to be called in the old days benign senescent forgetfulness, to mild cognitive impairment, to dementia, frank dementia. The mild cognitive impairment is the time when you can treat. Because people don't come to you and say, I'm normal when you treat me. People come to you when they start having a problem. And MCI is a very critical time for us to treat. And that's something, so early diagnosis becomes very important. And in this context, going through memory tests as part of a master health check, for example, is very important. Now, why do we have problems with aging? We often meet people who, post-retirement, there's a sudden drop in my 40 years of service. I had a nice retirement party, I went home. And from the next day, all I'm doing is reading the newspaper, going for walks. I'm not doing anything very active with my brain anymore. That can cause cognitive aging. One of the other things are little strokes, and I'm going to talk about that. As the blood supply gets worse, you have small strokes in your brain. They are not large enough to cause you alarm. They don't give you things like hemiparesis. But what they do is that they cut off little wires in your brain. And those circuits are important to you. And that's one of the reasons why you cognitively age. And the third, of course, is the degeneration, the pathological aging that we are talking about. Now, here is a picture, an MRI of somebody who is having multiple strokes in their brain. And this white that you see around the ventricles, the dark bags in your brain, the white that you see should not really be there. The white is a sign of poor perfusion. It's called leukoariosis. And if you have poor blood perfusion, then you have what we call lacunar infarcts, which are little strokes. And these have the impact of cognitively slowing you down. But today we understand it's not just cognitive impairment. They cause Parkinsonism, So people with vascular Parkinsonism walk with a very small stepped gait. The French call it marcher à petit pas. It's almost magnetic, it's almost like my feet are stuck to the ground. And late life depression is very strongly associated with poor blood supply in the brain. So we often attribute late life depression to psychosocial factors like loneliness and losing people in your life and so on. But this is the underlying biology for many people, that they have poor blood supply in their brain, and that's what's causing them to get depressed. So what underlies cognitive aging? On the one hand, you have the hold factors: hypertension, obesity, lipids or high cholesterol, diabetes. All these are preventable. All these advancing causing problems. On the other hand, you have factors which are lifestyle factors: sleep, exercise, diet, and mental health. All these also are preventable, but this prevention starts earlier. Right? So in some ways, most of us, when we are 40 or 45, that's when we think about starting to walk, right? Or starting to exercise regularly. I meet a lot of young people today who exercise regularly from the time they are in their teens, and they are doing the right thing. Okay, so the earlier you start to live a good lifestyle in terms of diet and exercise and sleep, the more protected you are from cognitive aging. So those are preventive factors too. In the middle, the colorful pictures are the pathology that happens in dementia. To put it very simply, waste product deposits itself in our brains. There's amyloid and tau, and neuroscientists have spent years fighting with each other as to which is more important. And today we know they are both important. They're both important in different ways, they both influence each other. But we know something else today. These risk factors, hypertension, obesity, diabetes, high cholesterol, we thought they only had something to do with the circulation and therefore heart health and strokes. Today we know they are also responsible for the amyloid and the tau. Okay, so in a sense, all this is interlinked, and it's all like a cascade that's waiting to happen. And when that cascade sets in, that's when you advance from normal cognitive aging to mild cognitive impairment and finally dementia. And that's the understanding that today we have about brain aging. Dementia is an extremely important condition because we're going to have an epidemic of it. We talk about ourselves as the world capital of diabetes. I can tell you we're not far from being the world capital of dementia. There's only one reason, right? We have a large population, and that large population is starting to live longer and longer. And dementia is a disease of age. The longer you live, the more likely you are to experience dementia. So this is something that all of us need to keep in mind. We have, as per estimates, about 5 million people with dementia living in India today, and that number will probably go up to 7 million in the not so distant future. You can imagine the public health need, you can imagine the clinical need, you can imagine the disability needs. They are extremely considerable. It's not normal aging, and that's something that's very, very important. We have this thing in society, always become old, and that's why it's become forgetful. Dementia is not normal aging because dementia causes disability. You can't do the things that you could do before, and progressively you need more and more help in order to get through your normal day. And as dementia progresses, people need to be led to the bathroom, people need to be assisted in their everyday ablutions, people need to be fed, people need to be kept safe, people need to be prevented from wandering from their house. It's a lot of stress on the caregiver. And there's something else that's happening in India. The caregivers, which are the families, are disappearing. How many people do you meet who are living in an extended family who are able to care for somebody with dementia today in urban India? Difficult. And if you look at people who are middle-aged like myself, I don't know who will be there to care for me if I get dementia. Right? So this is a challenge that we are not addressing, and that's one of the reasons it's a scary epidemic, because the needs are going to be so great. These are global trends, and what I'd like to emphasize here is that deaths are affected. The blue line is India, and you can see it is always growing. Okay, so deaths are affected. Your disability adjusted life years, which are an index of how long you will live with disability, those are increasing. Prevalence is growing, and if you think about it, the demography of India is changing, and with that, the problem of dementia and the associated issues are growing. The problem of brain aging is growing. We've had studies in all these places. Very happy to say that Chennai was something that we did many years ago. Both urban and rural populations are affected by dementia. This is something that we have to understand. And the other thing that we have to understand is that the causality is multifactorial. The good news is what I was telling you about the hold factors and the lifestyle factors. Dementia is preventable. Okay, so dementia is real. It's a disease. It's not normal aging, but it is preventable, and this is something that we all need to keep in mind. Now, here's another very interesting fact. As you get older, see how many disorders you gain. So it's not just wealth that you might gain, not just weight that you might gain. You gain what we call multi-morbidity. The number of disorders you have, the number of diagnoses you have go higher and higher. And by the time you're at 85 plus, you have 8 diagnoses on average. Okay? So the healthcare needs of the elderly are considerable because of this multi-morbidity. It's not just dementia that I'll have. I might have Parkinson's along with it. I might have stroke along with it. I might have arthritis along with it. I might have digestive issues along with it. In fact, most people I know who are older have problems with digestion. I may have neurogenital issues along with it. I might have peripheral issues, skin and neuropathy along with it. So in a sense, the needs keep climbing as you get older. The number of diagnoses you have keep climbing also as you get older. And so pretty much every bodily system in some way will get affected as you get older. And this is something that we have to keep in mind. I'm going to get all of you to do a simple exercise to see whether your brain is aging or not. Okay? Put your hands up. Make a fist. Open your palm. Turn it to the side. Now repeat after me. Fist. Say fist. Palm. Side. Now let's do this together. Fist, palm, side. Fist, palm, side. Fist, palm, side. Fist, palm, side. Now who was struggling? If you struggled, right, then that's a sign of your brain executive not doing very well. And who described this? This gentleman called Luria. Now there's another very interesting thing that he said. Okay? He said that this part of your brain is for regulating tone. This part of your brain to analyze and store information, and this part of your brain, the frontal lobes, for programming, regulation and verification of activity. Now what he was trying to say was, what you share with the rat, that's where your emotions come from. They are pretty primal. Okay? The front of the brain, which actually is huge, the frontal lobes, this is your decision maker, that's your executive. Okay? If you have emotional discontrol as you age, it's either because your emotional brain, which you share with the rat, has become overactive and this cannot control it anymore, or this has become weak and even normal emotions it cannot control anymore. Alright. So in a sense, your brain works in circuits, and even emotions and the regulation of emotions are governed by how different parts of the brain are working. And why am I saying this? These mechanisms also weaken as we age. How many of you have an older person in the family who sometimes says the most unacceptable things in company in front of everybody else? The point is, That's because that decision-making process is not working anymore the way it should work. I probably shouldn't say this. Right? This is not the right time to talk to this person. Whatever. That is what weakens as we get older. Right? The emotion to say something may come, the regulation is weak. Or just normal emotions come, the regulation is weak. So this is something that we all have to keep in mind. So what impacts our mental health? A very large proportion of older people have poor mental health as they age. Physical health starts to fade. Okay? You're forced to adapt. The world around you is changing and you don't like the way it's changing. That causes you problems. Your social environment is changing. You become lonely because the near and dear are departing, starting to go. COVID taught us that. So many people lost people who were close to them during COVID. Insecurities start to creep in. Sometimes they are physical insecurity, sometimes they are material, sometimes they are psycho-spiritual. Okay? I've had older people ask me repeatedly, what will happen when I die? It's a thought that comes to your mind as you get older. So these are things that happen, and then of course memories become less sharp and less relevant. So an older person has many reasons why their mental health may get compromised. And that's something we need to understand, apart from the biological reasons we were just talking about. So what can you do? You can stay fit. Okay? I think this is Canada. They have a National Senior Health and Fitness Day. Okay? You can eat healthy. And if you Google online, you'll find many healthy eating pyramids. The pyramid is, things at the bottom of the pyramid are healthy stuff like fruit and vegetables that you eat every day or 5 to 6 days a week. Things at the top of the pyramid are things that are unhealthy for you, that you restrict to 2 or 3 times a week. You can find this online. The best diet for older people is what's called the mind diet. Okay? And this comes from the Mediterranean diet, but I want to make one point here. The people who researched Mediterranean diets did not take one factor into consideration. They are consumed in salubrious surroundings, in company over 3 or 4 hours. So eating a Mediterranean diet like that and running to work in 10 minutes is probably not going to protect your brain. You'll have to not just eat the Mediterranean diet, you'll have to live the way people in the Mediterranean regions do in order to protect the brain. And that's something that most of us find very difficult to do in a country like ours. Okay. So, all we've had till now are drugs that influence neurotransmitters. And today if you go to a hospital with dementia, what you're getting is this. We have non-pharmacological therapies. And that's a whole list. There are several things. There is emerging evidence that non-pharmacological therapy is very useful for brain aging and disorders of brain aging, which means that drugs alone are not good enough. You need rehabilitation, you need non-pharmacological therapies. You could do yoga, you could do tai chi, you could do what's called reminiscence. There are many things that you could do. Today we have a very exciting world of neuromodulation that's developing. And neuromodulation has great potential, stimulating your brain using a strong magnetic impulse or an electrical impulse, or even giving yourself oxygen. These are things that actually can improve your brain function. So there is emerging evidence and a lot of interest there. But finally, that's the article that came out of the Hindu in which I collaborated a few days ago. There are new biologicals. And what do? They address antibodies. Okay? And in a sense, if you think about it, they are trying to eliminate the waste products that have got deposited in your brain in excess. And that's the most exciting thing that's happened in dementia care. There was one called aducanumab. It did not show such a great effect despite accelerated approval, but we have lecanemab, which today is being looked at with a great deal of positivism. So these are new treatments. It's a different way of treating, and it's a little more in line with what Professor Ludger was talking about rather than many of the other therapies that we've been doing till now. What Dr. Rohini was saying, we have a Buddhist philosophy. Medical care especially for vulnerable populations like disabled children with developmental disorders, elderly with neurodegenerative disorders. It has to be in harmony. I don't believe it's an either-or approach that's going to work. It's a multidisciplinary, multi-component, holistic approach that is going to help people with disorders of aging, but also right across the lifespan, people with any form of chronic disease. And so I'd like to stop by encouraging all of us to open our minds to aging, to dementia, to the possibility of multidisciplinary and holistic care, and finally and most importantly, because we are hosting the Neuropsychiatry Roundtable, to neuropsychiatry as a specialty. This borderland between neurology and psychiatry is actually not small, it's very large, and there is going to be a time when all these disorders will need this kind of integrated thinking and approach that we've been talking about right through today. With that, I'll say thank you very much. Thank you.